الحمد لله على كل حال ونعوذ بالله من حال أهل النار. اللهم لك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم وأكرم على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آل بيته وأزواجه وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We begin as we always do by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thanking Him. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for each and every single one of the blessings that He's given us. We thank Allah ta'ala for the blessing of warmth in the midst of cold, for the blessing of ease in the midst of difficulty, for the blessing of family in the midst of loneliness. We thank Allah ta'ala for giving us the blessing of guidance in a world filled with misguidance. We thank Allah ta'ala for giving us affluence in the midst of poverty. We thank Allah ta'ala for giving us eyes in the midst of blindness, for giving us hearing in the midst of deafness. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us a conscience in the midst of heartlessness. We thank Allah ta'ala for giving us the greatest blessing of all, the honor of knowing Allah, the opportunity to believe in Allah, and the community and the resources that allow us to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah Jalla Jalaluhu to make us from those who love Him and follow Him until the end of time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's another beautiful day in Michigan, and all days in Michigan are beautiful, especially when you get yourself some Treat You Batter cookies, which I haven't had yet, but that's okay. And so subhanAllah, one of the things that I have really enjoyed about Michigan is the opportunity to revisit this text that we're covering, which is Matarat al-Qulub, purification of the heart, and the explanation of it and the commentary on it by Shaykh Hamza, Hafidhahullah. And one of the things that I would like to start off with that I think is a beautiful kind of introduction is in fact a story that comes to us by Ibn Hibban, rahmatullahi ala al-Jami'. He tells us of a story of a man by the name of Abdullah ibn Muhammad, and he was one of the Murabitin. And the Murabitin were like the National Guard of the Muslim Ummah. And these individuals, their role and their placement was such that they were posted to guard the lands of the Muslims. And the story that he narrates to us is a story of this man who was posted on essentially the border of the Muslim nation. And as he was posted there, he saw a tent in the distance. When he saw this tent in the distance, he says, let me go and let me see what I will find within this tent. And he says that as I approach this tent, and this tent has no one around it, nothing around, no reason to even believe that there's a sign of livelihood other than of this actual tent in and of itself. And then he says that I go and I peek into the tent and I see within it an individual. And this individual, فِيهَا رَجُلٌ قَدْ ذَهَبَ يَدَاهُ وَرِجْلَاهُ, that he no longer has his hands or his feet. وَثَقِلَ سَمْعَهُ وَبَصَرَهُ, and this individual is hard of hearing and hard of sight. And he has no limb that is benefiting him except for his tongue. This individual is in the tent with absolutely no one around, and the only thing that he has working is his tongue. His hands are no longer working, his feet are no longer working, he's not able to see well and he's not able to hear well. And he says, the only thing that I hear him saying is, Allahumma awzi'ni an ahmadaka hamdan ukafi'u bihi shukra ni'mataka allati an'amta biha alayya wa faddaltani ala kathirin mimman khalaqta tafdila. He says, oh Allah, allow me to thank you a thanks that you are worthy of and you are deserving of for the blessings that you've given me that are so abundant, and you've allowed me to be far greater off than so many other people that don't have what I have. وَفَضَّلْتَنِي عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْتَ تَفْضِيلًا. And so this man who's observing Abdullah ibn Muhammad, he sees this guy, he's in the tent, he can't hear well, he can't see well, he can't use his hands, he can't use his feet. He says, what a strange man to be sitting abandoned alone in a tent in the middle of the desert, and to find himself in a state of immense gratitude, saying a remarkably beautiful dua in regards to gratitude. And so he says, Wallahi la'atiyanna hadha al-rajul wa la'as'alannahu anna lahu hadha al-kalam. He says, I will approach this man and I will ask him, where did he get these words or this inspiration of gratitude? Is it fahm? Is it an understanding? Is it knowledge? Is it inspiration? Where did he get this? So I came to this man and I told him, I heard you saying, and notice that Abdullah ibn Muhammad, he heard the dua only once and he immediately internalized this dua. He goes to this man he's never met before, he's never spoken to him before, and he says, I heard you saying, oh uncle, this dua, Allahumma awzi'ni an ahmadaka hamdan ukafi'u bihi shukra ni'mataka allati an'amta biha alay wa faddaltani ala kathirin mimman khalaqta tafdila. Oh Allah, allow me to thank you, a thanks that you are most deserving of for the blessings, the favors that you've given to me, and that you favored me over so many of your creation. He says, where did you get this dua from, O uncle? And he says, what blessings are you referring to? And how are you, look at how he's going deep. He says, and where do you see yourself better off than so many others? وَأَيُّ فَضِيلَةٍ تُفَضَّلْ بِهَا عَلَيْكَ تَشْكُرُهَا عَلَيْهَا. What favors do you see Allah has favored you having that others to have? Look at how the man responds. Look at how the man responds. This man who, as you're looking at me, cannot see. This man who, as you're listening to me, was unable to hear. This man who, as you walked your way to the masjid, was unable to walk. This man who, as you drove your car, this is a man who was unable to move his hands. In fact, it says he had no hands and he had no feet. What does he say? He says, وَمَا تَرَى مَا صَنَعَ رَبِّي. And he says, and what do you see that my Lord has done? You see, because gratitude, which our topic for today is not rooted in people being, it is not rooted in your life astronomically changing because of the external circumstances changing. But in fact, gratitude is significantly about life being exactly what it is right now, but you changing the way that you look at exactly what your life is. It's not the circumstances changing that makes you grateful. It's you changing that makes you grateful. So as we talk about shukr, I want to highlight this sentence, وَمَا تَرَى مَا صَنَعَ رَبِّي بِي. And what do you see, O questioner, that my Lord has done to me? What are you witnessing my Lord do to me? And then look at this next statement that he says. He says, Wallahi, لو أرسل السماء علي نارا فأحرقتني وأمر الجبال فدمرتني وأمر البحر فغرقتني وأمر الأرض فبلعتني ما ازددت لربي إلا شكرا. He says, I swear by Allah, if the لو أرسل السماء علي نارا فأحرقتني, if the heavens were to rain fire upon me and to burn me, and if the mountains were to explode and destroy me, and if the oceans were to cast forth and drown me, and if the earth beneath me were to open up and to swallow me, ما ازددت لربي إلا شكرا. It would only increase me in gratitude to my Lord. Check this out. لما أنعم علي من لساني هذا. لما أنعم علي من لساني هذا. Because of what he has given me of the blessing of this tongue that I have. Because of what he's given me of this tongue that I have. And I think that this is a story that we visited before. And it's one that, subhanAllah, is a lengthy one and it has too many lessons. But this idea that all of these tragedies and afflictions coming upon him would not change him from being except more grateful to Allah because of the worthiness of just the blessing of his tongue being as it is, allowing him to feel an immense sense of gratitude for what Allah Ta'ala has done for him. Meaning all of those trials and tribulations would only amplify his appreciation for the blessing of what? For the blessing of his tongue. And that's the reality of trials and tribulations and difficulties and afflictions, is that we have a tendency to over amplify the volume of those trials and tribulations, when in reality what they must do is that by recognizing how difficult matters is that we're able to better recognize the blessings in our life for what they are. And so this narration is something that truly highlights this to us. And you all should know by now, because I believe we visited this story before, right? You guys remember? No? Should we continue the narration then? I was starting it as a reference point without the intention of going through the whole narration, but we'll go through the narration inshallah, because the lesson only becomes clear. Although I was quite certain that we covered it, but I trust your memories. And so he says, now that you've come to me and you're asking me, how am I in this state? He said, I have something to ask of you. He says, ولكن يا عبد الله إذا أتيتني لي إليك حاجة قد تراني على أية حالة أنا لست أقدر على نفسي على ضر ولا نفع ولقد كان معي بني لي يتعاهدني في وقت صلاتي فيوضئني إذا جعت أطعمني وإذا عطشت سقاني. He says, but now that you're here and I've given you this most valuable of life lessons, and you're observing that I can neither see well nor hear well, nor do I have working arms, nor do I have working feet, and you found me in this middle of this barren desert with nothing but this tent that shades me, and you find me in a state of immense gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that Allah ta'ala has given me. Now that Allah ta'ala has brought you all the way here, I have a need from you. Li ilayka haja. He says, you have observed my circumstance, and he says, you know that I can neither harm myself nor benefit myself. He says, what you don't know is that I have a son who used to take care of me. And the first thing that he says that his son used to do for him is what? When it was time for my prayer, my son used to help me make my wudu. Subhanallah. The first favor of his son that he highlights is that my son, وَفِي وَقْتِ صَلَاتِي فَيُوَضِّئُنِي, that at the time of my prayer, my son would help me to make my wudu. Then he says, and if I'm hungry, he would feed me, and if I'm thirsty, he would give me water to quench my thirst. And he says, look at this, وَلَقَدْ فَقَدْتُهُ مُنْذُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ. And he says, and I haven't seen him in 3 days. I haven't seen him in 3 days. Let's take a time out here for a second. What did Abdullah ibn Muhammad find him doing? Thanking Allah. He found him thanking Allah in the most beautiful ways. Where had he already been? Not only in a state of immobility, not only in a state of unable to see, not only in a state of unable to hear, he found him in a state of infinite gratitude to Allah when he had not seen the sun that feeds him or gives him water to drink or helps him to make wudu to pray for 3 days. And he found him in a state of gratitude. Just think about that. Meaning even, some of us, we have one deadline where we want things to be done a certain time and in a certain way. And the minute, like you're in line at a drive-through and there's 2 cars ahead of you, and one of the cars ordered 1 too many chicken sandwiches, and we begin to panic. We're like, whoa. I got places to go to, people to see, so much going on in my life. I'm going to be late to class, and if I'm late to class, all of these things begin to fall apart. and you're at the drive-thru to get a coffee. And your whole life falls into shambles, then it becomes why me, why Allah, all these different things. He's not only in this state of incredible disability and incredible difficulty, but he also hasn't seen his son in 3 days who feeds him and gives him water and helps him to make wudu. And he was found unknowingly that anyone is even watching him. We're not even talking about performative gratitude, because a lot of our gratitude in 2024, particularly consumer gratitude and like capitalistic gratitude, it's a show, it's a performance, right? Hashtag blessed, hashtag gratitude, right? Like, look at me, you know, so blessed to be with my mother, you know, selfie. And then 2 hours before that, I was yelling at my mother. That's not being grateful to your mother. That's not being grateful for your mother. We're talking about a man who didn't even know he was being heard. A man who didn't even know he was being seen. And all he was seen doing is being grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, but I have a need because I don't know where my son is and I haven't seen him in 3 days. I haven't seen him in 3 days. And so Abdullah ibn Muhammad, he says, I leave this man and I say to myself, Wallahi ma masha khalqun fi hajati khalqin kana a'zamu 'inda Allahi ajran mimman yamshi fi hajati mithlik. He says, I can't think of anyone who is in a better position than one who has the opportunity to be in the servant of someone like you. And look at, subhanAllah, even Abdullah ibn Muhammad is a walking lesson book for us, because he didn't just feel honored to have met this man, but he even felt honored to be in the service of this man. And it is an honor for us every time Allah Ta'ala utilizes us for the goodness of others. And the scholars of our past taught us to be more grateful for that than for the blessings of materials that expire. Like, it's normal that when you get a house that you're thankful. But are you thankful to Allah when He gives you the ability to pay zakah? Are you thankful to Allah when He gives you the ability to pray salah in jama'ah? Are you thankful to Allah that you came here to this program instead of what somewhere else that on the Day of Judgment you'll be regretful of that place? So being thankful to Allah is also being thankful for the manifestation of guidance in your life. And then he says, I walk in the service of this man trying to find his son. And he says, it doesn't take a long time for me to come across what remains of his son, the remains of his son who had very evidently been attacked by some type of animal, some type of beast of the desert. And he says all that remained was parts of his son. And he says that immediately I was struck with sadness on behalf of this man, and I was completely shocked. And he says, what can I even go back to this man and say? How can I even go back to this man? What kind of face am I going to bring to this man to let him know, after everything that he's been through, after being alone in the desert, after losing his physical sight, after losing his hearing, after no longer having working hands, after no longer having working feet, after not eating or drinking for 3 days, he sent me to search for his son. How am I going to go and face him and let him know that the only family member he has, the only source of survival that he has, he too is no longer alive? How am I going to go and stand in front of him and say that? And he says that I go back to him, and he says it crossed my mind the story of Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salam. And he says, I remembered Ayyub alayhi salam and everything that happened to him. So I began to talk to him. I entered upon the uncle, and immediately the uncle said to me, I made a request with you. What happened with my request? And so now Abdullah ibn Muhammad, who is a murabit, he's kind of having almost like a back and forth with the uncle that he's sitting with. He says to him, who do you think is more favored to Allah, you or Ayyub alayhi salam? He says, of course, Ayyub alayhi salam. He says, okay, what do you know that Allah Ta'ala has done to Ayyub alayhi salam? He says, Allah did a lot with Ayyub alayhi salam. He says, didn't Allah test him with his wealth? He said, yes. He says, didn't Allah test him with his family? He says, yes. Didn't Allah test him with his health? He said, yes. He says, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala find him in all of those situations. He says, وَجَدَهُ شَاكِرًا صَابِرًا حَامِدًا. Allah found Ayyub alayhi salam to be patient, grateful, and he found him to be in a state of immense thankfulness. He says, and how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala respond to Ayyub alayhi salam being in this state? He says Allah ta'ala was pleased with him. He says, now that Allah ta'ala was pleased with him, do you want Allah ta'ala to be pleased with you? So the uncle is like, wait a second, man. Like, I just asked you to go and find my son. Like, I didn't ask you for this whole like life lesson about Ayyub alayhi salam. I told you that I'm here and that my son is out there and that I have no food and no water and I have no need from anyone but Allah, but that I have a son that used to help me to make wudu, and that I have no working limbs to make my own wudu or to feed myself, and my son assisted me with that. I told you to go find my son. What happened with my son? Awjiz bil kalam. Be brief in your words, may Allah have mercy upon you. He's still making dua for the guy. He says, be brief in your words, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon you. And he said, I found your son, and I found him completely lifeless, and it seems that he was attacked by some of the beasts of the desert, and I found him in the state, and immediately the uncle, who is in the state of no sight, no hearing, no working limbs, in the middle of the desert, he says, Alhamdulillah, الذي لم يخلق من ذريتي خلقا يعصيه فيعذبه بالنار. He says at that moment his immediate reaction was, all thanks is due to Allah, the one who did not allow it to be that from my family is a creation of Allah that turned away in disobedience, and because of that will be punished in the grave. He took a breath after the statement of gratitude, and that was his final breath. In the exhale, he lost his life. And now Abdullah ibn Muhammad, who is a murabit, he's just a National Guard guy, guarding the lands of the Muslim, he sits there and he says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He's in a complete state of devastation. He says, now I have this man, I don't know what to do with him, I don't know what his story is. And he says, and I bury my head in my hands in complete sorrow that I was not able to help this man even in his most vulnerable hour. But more than that, I was perplexed, I was mind blown to find him in a state of immense gratitude even at the news of the death of his son. Even at the news of the death of his son. That the last statement of this man was gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, as I was in this state, a caravan came by and they found me next to this lifeless body that I had covered with a garment. And he said, they came to me and they said, who are you and what is your story? And he started to tell them that my name is Abdullah ibn Muhammad. I am one of the murabitin. I came across this man. I heard him making a dua of thanks. I came to realize that he had neither eaten nor drank for 3 days. I came to realize that he can neither see. And you just imagine, my dear brother and sister, your life for 1 day without sight. Just 1 day, just 1 hour without being able to see. Just imagine. Imagine being unable to hear. Imagine a life without these things that we refer to as basic functions. Imagine living like that. And now this man was like that. And he says, I found him like this. And I found him in a state of immense gratitude, making the most beautiful dhikr of hamd that I had ever heard being made from the heart. And when I commented on this dua and I asked him straight up, what are you grateful for that Allah favored in your life that He hadn't given to other than you? He says, if Allah showered me with fire to burn me, and Allah allowed the earth beneath me to swallow me, and Allah allowed the waves of the ocean to swallow me, then it would only increase me in gratitude to Allah for the blessing of this tongue through which Allah allows me to thank Him. How incredible is that? He narrates them to the story, and then he tells them, and then he asked me for a favor to find his son, because his son is how he was able to make wudu. His son was how he was able to pray and eat and drink, and all I found was the lifeless body of his son, even that he responded to with hamd and shukr. Even that he responded to with hamd and shukr, and then Allah took his life as well. These people were speechless. They said, show us who this man is. They said, show us who this man is. And as soon as they did, they began to kiss the lifeless body of this man, and they began to hug him. And so Abdullah ibn Muhammad was amazed. He said, who is this man? He says, this is Abu Qilaba al-Jurmi. This is Abu Qilaba al-Jurmi. This is the companion of Ibn Abbas. This was a tabi'i who was one of the closest friends and students of Ibn Abbas. They said he is an immense and intense lover of Allah and His Prophet ﷺ, and he was someone that was known for his devotional worship of Allah. And so he said, we washed him and we prayed upon him. There's more to this the story. Subhanallah, Abdullah ibn Muhammad, he says that after we buried him, I was still on my duty on the borders of the Muslim lands, guarding in this most unforgettable memories of my life. And he says, I saw this same man who we just prayed janazah in, I saw him in my sleep. And he says, I saw him with eyes that are working, with hands and feet that are working. And I saw him wearing from the jewelry of Jannah, from the clothing of Jannah. And I saw him celebrating and rejoicing in the joy of Jannah. And he says, I heard him saying to himself the ayah, Salamun alaykum bima sabartum fa ni'ma uqbad dar. Patience and peace and blessings be upon you for your patience, and what a beautiful home to be chosen for you. Peace and blessings be upon you for your patience, and what a beautiful home to be chosen for you. And he came to him and he says, aren't you my friend who I just buried? And he says, yes. He says, there is levels that Allah has that are specifically for those who respond to calamities with patience and with gratitude. All of this, my dear brothers and sisters, to highlight that gratitude is directly connected with patience. And that gratitude is something that we may oftentimes attribute with the ability to recognize good times when you are in them. But the reality of gratitude is not just the ability to recognize good times when you're in the midst of them, but in fact, the real essence of shukr is to recognize that in every circumstance, you are in goodness. And that in the midst of difficulty, you are still in blessings. And to be able to unravel and unpack that behind the brokenness, behind the devastation, that there is beauty and there is brilliance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That gratitude is not the ability to judge Allah for what He's doing, but it's in fact the ability to judge yourself for how you react to what Allah Ta'ala wrote for you. And that's why, subhanAllah, one of the companions, he lost all of his children except one. He lost all of his children except one. And he was found saying, Alhamdulillah, that Allah gave me this child to keep and chose only to take the ones that He had taken. Look at this alternative perspective. To celebrate what you have instead of what you no longer have. Similarly, a companion who lost his limbs and says, I thank you, O Allah, for what you've allowed me to keep. And I thank you, O Allah, for what you've chosen to take. And this type of gratitude is such a critical component of the disease of the heart that we're highlighting today, which is obliviousness to blessings. And the reason why it's important is because we have very narrow and very specific definition of what blessings are. And the scholars of our tradition, they redefine what blessings are. They say blessings are not what you enjoy. Blessings are not what you find happiness and pleasure in. Blessings are what lead you to the one who blesses. Blessings are what lead, النعمة ما تؤديك إلى المنعم. That blessings are what lead you to the one that blesses. Blessings are not just what you thrive in and what you enjoy and these kind of things. Rather, those things, if they don't lead you to Allah, that they are a source of regret for you. So obliviousness to blessings is a disease of the heart that's strongly rooted in us choosing to determine what we view worth celebrating versus what we choose not to be worth celebrating. And on the way here, subhanAllah, I was talking to some of the brothers, and one of the scholars, they mentioned to us that a sin that leads you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually better for you than an act of obedience that takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that regard, even a sin can be a blessing. And the ability for you to acknowledge a sin as a blessing allows you to recover from a sin instead of just soaking in that I'm a sinner and I'm this horrible person and that I can't recover and I can't move on with my life. Instead saying, this sin is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed to happen in my life, and the best thing that I can do with the sin is utilize it as a moment to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this allows everything to have the potentiality to be a source of blessings for us. And so I want us to give some definition to what the symptoms are of this disease of the heart. And the first of them is that a person that is oblivious to blessings is a person that lacks qana'ah. A person who is oblivious to blessings is a person that lacks qana'ah. They lack contentment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're displeased with the decrees of Allah, and because of that, they're constantly feeling like they have a chip on their shoulder, like Allah could have given me better looks, Allah could have given me a better job, Allah could have given me a better spouse, a better family, better parents. And so they feel entitled to more from Allah than that which they've been given from Allah. And this level of discontentment with Allah, or a lack of qana'ah with Allah, is something that many of us may grapple with unknowingly, right? Even think about your own self and how you wish Allah Ta'ala may have done things differently in your life. The other symptom that manifests itself as a person who is oblivious to blessings in their life is that this is a person who is very often jealous. And they're jealous because they feel, again, that they're able to, subhanAllah, identify what they deem to be blessings in the lives of others, but they're unable to identify the blessings in their own life. So they say, how come this guy has this job and he's making this much a month? Or how come this sister got married at 23 and I'm 27 and still not married? And they're jealous of other people because they're able to see the blessings in the lives of others, but they're not able to see the blessings in their own life. And little do they know that sister who's married now is wishing that she had more time to accomplish more before she got married. And that person that has that job wishes they never got that job in the first place. Everyone wishes to have what they don't have, and those who do have wish that it looked differently. And so part of what the symptomology of a person who is oblivious to blessings is that they struggle with jealousy a lot because they're able to identify the blessings of others, but they're not able to see the blessings in their own life. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guides the believing women and men to search for blessings in their own life and not to be searching for blessings in the lives of others. And we find that even in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he tells us to look to those that have less than us. Because the ability to look towards those who have less than us is a reminder of how much we have ourselves. And we don't like to do it because it makes us uncomfortable. Like that moment when we thought about not having physical sight. right? Because we have this idea of dawam al-ni'mah, continuous blessings. And the challenge of dawam al-ni'mah is that it makes blessings feel no longer like blessings. But if a person is continuously challenging, what would it be like if I didn't have the things that I've always had? It makes us actually see them with a greater sense of appreciation. And that's why the scholars, they say, the first thing that we're tasked with is knowledge that every blessing is from Allah, and it is enough of a blessing that the blessing is from Allah, and Allah chose it for you. Like before, this drink is a blessing because it's a drink. This blessing is a blessing because Allah chose me to be worthy of that blessing. And then after that, it is to appreciate the functionality that Allah Ta'ala gave me through this. That through this, Allah Ta'ala gives me energy. Through this, Allah Ta'ala gives me goodness. That level of appreciation and gratitude is something that is often very overlooked because of our like almost mechanical and haphazard function of life. And the other thing that the scholars, they say is, see what you're asking Allah Ta'ala for and see how Allah Ta'ala is answering what you're asking for. And when you begin to see that you're asking and Allah Ta'ala is giving, you begin to have a greater sense of appreciation. This is just normal cause and effect. That, for example, if I say to a brother, get me tea, and he goes and he gets me the tea, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, I have a special type of appreciation for that because I made a request and it was fulfilled. But then he says the next level is when you're able to go beyond that and you see that there are things that you wanted that you never even asked for, and Allah Ta'ala gave them to you without you even asking for them. And being able to see Allah Ta'ala do that for you. It reminds me of marriage. And subhanAllah, many of us, we have ideas of who we want in our life to be our spouses. But there's a difference between what we want and what we need. And usually there's a contradiction between what we want and what we need. And you'll see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, time and time and time again in our life, He chooses for us what we need versus what we want. And Allah Ta'ala will hear us calling for something, but yet Allah Ta'ala, being who He is, being Al-Alim, being Al-Hasib, being Al-Raqib, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reads between the lines. And instead of Allah Ta'ala giving us what we want, Allah Ta'ala very often gives us what we need without us even asking for it. So being able not just to say, I asked Allah Ta'ala in my morning and evening remembrances, I asked Allah Ta'ala to give me, and Allah gave me this water. That's beautiful. But what did you ask Allah Ta'ala for that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala interpreted and understood the actual need behind it, and Allah Ta'ala gave you better than what you asked for? And this ability to see that and appreciate that and be grateful for that, this is something that is so critical to overcoming obliviousness to blessings. And I'll end you with the reason behind that. And that is that the opposite of shukr is what? What is the opposite of shukr al-ni'mah? Kufr al-ni'mah. It is to deny blessings for being what they are. They're equally present in your life, but you don't see them to be what they are. How does that happen? That happens when I allow my intellect and my logic and my rationale to be what determines if something is good or bad, versus allowing Allah Ta'ala to be the one that determines whether something is good or bad. So I begin to normalize blessings and think of them as things that I'm entitled to. That's one element of it. And the other thing that happens is that I begin to judge Allah instead of judging myself. So if only Allah Ta'ala gave me more money, if only Allah Ta'ala gave my mother more health, if only Allah Ta'ala gave me a higher education level, if only Allah Ta'ala did this. And this becomes kufr ni'mah. And what happens when a person has kufr ni'mah? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees that we don't recognize blessings as blessings, Allah Ta'ala begins to strip them away from us, one by one by one. We ask Allah Ta'ala to protect us from this. the ability to see blessings for what they are, the ability to see blessings as the givings of Allah, the i'ta' of Allah, and to appreciate that even one moment, our teachers, they said this, they said, if you were to lose your sight for 1 hour, just 1 hour, you'd be willing to give up everything that you've ever possessed in this world, just for 1 hour of sight, just for that sight to be returned to you. Logically, we think that we can negotiate these things. Rationally, we think, well, if I lose my eyesight, but I have $1 million, maybe I'd rather have $1 million than my eyesight. But if you were to live that reality, just from one basic blessing that you never even asked Allah Ta'ala for, that you wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Because that's called appreciation with the heart. That is shukr. Shukr is something that begins in the heart, it's manifested in the limbs, it's manifested on the tongue, and it's shown through the actions in the limbs. And that is the full package of shukr. When because I'm able to, with my heart, recognize everything that Allah Ta'ala does for me, I'm able then to show that gratitude from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like in the story of the people of the 2 gardens in Surah Al-Kahf, right? هَذَا مِن فَضْلِ رَبِّي لِيَبْلُوَنِي أَأَشْكُرْ أَمْ أَكْفُرْ. This is from Allah's favor upon me. My intelligence is a sign of Allah's favor upon me, right? My financial success, my familial dynamic, everything that I have, this is Allah's favor upon me. Then what am I going to do? I'm going to show with my limbs, with my time, with my health, with everything that Allah has given me. I'm going to show, now that Allah has given me this, what am I going to do with this? That is shukr. I'll end you with a moment of the Prophet ﷺ's life that I try to visit often. When the Prophet ﷺ had a beautiful gathering like this beautiful gathering, and the Prophet ﷺ had a beautiful meal like the many countless meals that we have, the Prophet ﷺ, he points to that meal and he says to the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, with tears in his eyes, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. That one day, he quotes the ayah in Surah Al-Takathur, that one day you will be asked about the blessings, the na'im that you are in. The Prophet ﷺ is the most brilliant and intelligent human being to ever walk this earth. The Prophet ﷺ is the most remarkable and accomplished individual. But yet the Prophet ﷺ, simply at the sight of a morsel of food in front of him that Allah Ta'ala chose for him, the Prophet ﷺ became a human being that was in complete poverty and brokenness in front of Allah, in a state of immense gratitude that if Allah chose not to give me this, then I would never have it. That is shukr. Shukr is where the baseline is nothing. Shukr is your ability to recognize that Allah needed to do nothing for you. Nothing is something that we deserve. And everything beyond nothing is something. Everything beyond nothing is something. Allah could have allowed your existence in this world to just be that you exit the womb of your mother for one moment. Every second after that is a gift. Every moment after that of health is a gift. Every moment of guidance is a gift. Every moment of family, of joy, of laughter, of friendship is a gift. And every moment after that is a blessing from Allah worth thanking Allah Ta'ala for. When the baseline is nothing, everything beyond that becomes a favor from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So we ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to make us from those who are grateful. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to forgive us for our shortcomings and mistakes. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to help us to be grateful in times of difficulty and in times of ease, in times of His givings and in the times of His takings. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to allow us to be grateful as we enter the month of Ramadan, and that Allah Ta'ala allows this month of Ramadan to be the greatest month of Ramadan yet in my life and yours. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.